And good morning, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Digital Parenting with me, Josh Ramsey, and Be in Touch. We are here to educate, connect, and protect our children in this very, very trying time. And I think that's a great place to start, is that we are now heading into our sixth week of this lockdown experience here in South Africa. And for our international viewers, it has been quite a long haul already. And when I was preparing for this episode, I really want parents to take a breath. So if you've managed to get the kids busy doing something and you have a moment just to watch this now, hopefully you have some tea. And if not, feel free to put this on in the background and try and make yourself comfortable, at least for the next 30 minutes, where we will be going over some ways in which you can talk to your children about their need for regulating their use of screens, and perhaps as well as just giving yourself an opportunity to just talk to them about the day-to-day realities that we're now in, having crossed the threshold of de-escalating from level 5 down to level 4, and with that coming a whole another continuing set of challenges. So, just some housekeeping. If you are watching on YouTube right now, just be sure to open a browser and head to the URL www.beintouch.org.za/live. There are some resources that we've created on that page that I'll refer to in this episode, and you might want to check them out. So if you are watching in YouTube, just open our URL with www.beintouch.org.za/live, where you can get access to some of the resources I'm going to be talking to you about. And we've got some great questions that have come in during the week, and I went onto the Village Facebook group, which is an amazing community of parents that are doing their best to take care of their kids in this time, and some of the questions are also taken from there. So if you don't know about that Facebook group, go and check it out. It's the Village on Facebook, and there's a great community there. So as you may know, in these episodes, I spend the first half of the 30 minutes giving you some information and ways in which you can talk to your children. And then I spend about 15 minutes taking questions and reflecting on some insights that other parents have had. So, a big disclaimer is that I myself am not a parent, and what I bring to this conversation is that I get to talk to a lot of different parents and touch in on a lot of different households, and so can bring some of those learnings to you. I just want to say that up front because I can only imagine what it's like to be leading your children through this time. And I think that's a good word to reflect upon as we go through these times with our family, is really that adults and as the parents and caregivers in the home, we're really wanting to be leading. And that doesn't always have to mean that you're getting everything right with screen time. I think we need to be gentle on ourselves, and you need to be gentle on yourselves in this time, and realize that perhaps the screen time guidelines that we'd have in normal day-to-day life it's more about how those screens are being used consciously, and being a little bit more gentle with ourselves in terms of how much time we are allowing our children onto screens, because as we know, everyone's working from home, and that is not an easy thing to do when you've got children running around. So I'm going to explain some of the reasons why helping your children to be more conscious with their screen time use is important right now. And I know that we've got parents with different age group children. So we've got parents with young kids, and we've also got some parents with teenagers as well. And I'm going to give both of those age groups a tool that you can use to talk to them about how it is that they're so attracted to the screens that they use, and what you can do about it. So without any further ado, let's jump in. Remember, if you do want your questions to be answered live on the show, you can WhatsApp me. My number is on that URL I gave out before. Otherwise, you can just send an email to info@beintouch.org.za, and we will either integrate your questions into this episode or into tonight's episode at 7 p.m. or next week. Okay, but without any further ado, let's get straight into the talking points for this week. And the first one is a really powerful way to explain to your children why they need to be careful about what they're watching on their screens. And this comes from the work of a guy called Daniel Siegel, who's an amazing doctor and neuroscientist in the States, and he calls it the hand-brain model. If you've seen me do this before, just bear with me, and if you haven't seen it in a while, please pay attention because I've added a second little bit that I think is quite useful for explaining to children. And that's really what this teaching piece is around. It's about explaining to your children why they need to be careful about what they're doing on their screens and why you're concerned with what they're doing. So you ask your child to raise your hand with you, and you explain to them that you're going to teach them how their brain works with screens. So my right hand on the right here represents my brain, and we're going to wrap the thumb across the palm of the hand. And this is going to represent the feeling component of our brain. That's the midbrain. It's in the middle of our brain, and it's where all the hormones are regulated, all the kind of emotional centers that we have. So suffice to say, for your young children, just tell them this is going to represent your feeling brain, and then you're going to bring the fingers down over the top, and these fingers along the top here, they represent, your thinking brain. Now, the teaching points here are that one, your child understands that they have a thinking component of their brain and a feeling component of the brain. And then you're really wanting them to have a felt experience. So if you tell them to grab their thumb with their fingers and hold onto it, you can tell them it's really easy to hold onto your thumb, isn't it? And it is. It's very easy to hold onto the thumb. And the reason for that is that the thinking brain and the feeling brain are in balance. Now, you can ask them to tell you a story about when they've lost control, when they couldn't hold on to their feelings using their thinking. They couldn't hold on to their feelings and they flipped their lid, and maybe they did something they regretted in the future when they look back at it, and they broke something or kicked a couch and it didn't make much sense, but it was because their feelings were bigger than their thinking brain could handle. So you tell them that this is a great example of a balanced brain. The thinking component is holding on to the feeling and controlling it, and it's really working together. We don't want our children to only be thinking. We want them to have feelings, but we're wanting them to have them in balance. Now, what happens when your children spend a lot of time gaming or mindlessly scrolling through Facebook? There's been a lot of spoken about this in the media, but basically it's dopamine that is released in the brain when children aimlessly scroll through social media, always wondering what's going to be around the next post, what might I see next? And this endless scrolling floods their brain with dopamine, which gives them a sense of stimulation, but doesn't actually translate into a kind of a positive behavior where they're actually learning something significant. So this mindless scrolling is kind of just stimulating the feeling, emotional component of the brain without actually giving the mental, the more cognitive or thinking brain something really useful to do. So in an example of gaming with kids, and we're going to touch on this in a little bit with some of the questions that have come in. Gaming is really spiking adrenaline. If it's fast-paced, flashing screen, something like Fortnite or PUBG, especially survival-based games, causing a lot of feeling in your child's brain. So if you can tell them that those kind of mindless scrolling on social media and the really intensive gaming that they're engaging with is feeding their feeling brain, and you can tell them that to model feeding that feeling brain, they can wrap their hand from their left hand around that right thumb, and of course that will make the model of the feeling brain much bigger. And now if you ask them, is it as easy to hold on to that feeling brain using your fingers, they'll tell you no, it's I can't really grip it, I can't really get my thinking brain or my fingers around my feeling brain or the thumb, which has now grown bigger. And that's a great way to give them this example of, well, you see, when you spend too much time mindlessly scrolling through your social media platforms or playing a lot of games, you're growing that feeling brain, and it's reducing your ability to control your feelings with your thinking brain. And that's a really great way to explain it to your younger children, probably under the age of maybe 10, maybe 12, depending on the maturity of your child. And so you can use that model to explain to them why you have these rules in your home, which hopefully you do. When it comes to slightly older children, I'm going to share two slides with you in a moment that help to explain some of the ways in which we can understand our adolescent children's behavior. And if we have a look at this slide over there, up on my left-hand side is a slide of an adolescent's brain. So this is really from any child that's about 12 years or older. And I mentioned dopamine before, and this is really one of the hormones that helps to motivate risk taking, or it helps to motivate learning in our adolescent children. And if you start at the top of that slide to my left, you'll see that boredom is the kind of start of this learning cycle. So this slide represents the learning cycles that our children go on. And what is interesting is that the state of boredom is something that actually catalyzes a lot of learning. And it's obviously something that adolescents try to avoid, excuse the pun, like the plague. You know, they don't like feeling bored. They want something to do. And given our current context, finding something to do is not always the easiest because we can't go outside and we can't spend time with friends. But let me explain this to you, and hopefully it'll help you build some compassion for your adolescent child. So the average dopamine level in an adolescent child's brain is actually lower than that of an 8-year-old, which means that they are more inclined to boredom. And it's this boredom that, if you follow the cycle in the slide, the boredom brings them to the point that they need to do something to change how they feel. And it's starting to concretize this understanding that if I want to change how I feel, I need to do something, that my emotions are the result of an action that I've taken in the past. And that can be very empowering for children. So when this boredom is experienced in the brain, that's a low level of dopamine. And as I said, that's a naturally occurring thing to drive learning. Your adolescent child is then looking to take some form of risk, to go and try and master a kickflip on their skateboard, or try and practice a poem that they might be saying into their remote classroom in the video the next day, or they'll try and perhaps climb a tree out in your garden if you have one, and they'll be driven to take some form of risk. And when this risk is moved through, there's obviously resistance. What will people think? Will I fail? Am I good enough to do this? All these ways in which, our children's brain are trying to, paradoxically push them towards taking a risk to learn something, but also protect them from any form of rejection or failure. And of course, it's the grit and the willpower that they develop to step over that risk taking, or that resistance to putting themselves out there or trying something, that results in the rewards that we can see up there. And these are the rewards like self-confidence, improved ability to communicate, or improved ability to gauge how their friends respond to the joke they've just said, or something very practical like improving the ability to build a model if that's what they've spent their time doing, or complete a puzzle if that's what they've decided to do to deal with the boredom. And the result of these rewards are the skills that they develop that they will need as they move into adulthood. And really, the primary goal of the adolescent age is to become less dependent on their parents and more dependent on their peers. And it's this less dependence on parents that often shows up in the kind of rebelliousness and the pushing back on authority that we see in this age group. And one of the questions that I'll deal with later actually talks specifically about this. So this slide that we can see here, this is the ideal version of life where your child is being motivated by boredom to go out and learn new things and developing rewards and skills. Maybe this slide is pre-lockdown or pre our current reality. And the next slide really shows us a more accurate representation of where we are now and why the choices we make now are so very important. So if you have a look at this slide really represents what we're dealing with on the day-to-day, where that boredom, instead of driving your child towards taking a risk, there's a quick U-turn because there's devices available. And in fact, they're having to use devices for their online learning anyway. So the device is there, and instead of pushing through that risk and pushing through the resistance of what will people think, can I do this, am I good enough, will I be able to do it, and getting to those rewards, we see that there's a much easier path with less resistance to just pick up your phone, go and watch a YouTube video, get lost in social media, or play some game that really stimulates the brain and changes how we feel. Again, resulting in that dynamic where the feeling brain is too big and developed or overpowers our ability to think through our decisions. And obviously, we see this in teenagers where we don't understand why they do the things that they do. So, in the slide, you can see that boredom, that lowered dopamine level, is driving behavior. We start heading towards a risk. This is where the child is thinking about what they're going to do, what are they going to do to change how they are feeling. And instead of them going and performing an action, which obviously are limited in this time with the lockdown, as well as the fact that they may not be in the habit of using physical actions, playing with puzzles, reading through books, or writing, or doing some creative writing, or doing some drawing to change how they feel or express how they feel. It's just so much easier to pick up a phone or go and play a game. And what happens there is that, as you can see, there's a U-turn of where that attention is placed, and it goes into the device. The device is flooding your child's brain with dopamine, with adrenaline, with all the feel-good hormones that these devices are designed to make us feel, and then eventually that'll taper off, and then they'll head back to boredom. And what we're seeing is that children will spend a lot of time just circling around this same space where they're going from boredom to their device, back to boredom, to their device. And obviously, if you have a look on the left side of that slide, there's no skill development, there's no reward that is happening, which means that your child is growing up but not developing. And as I said in the beginning of this episode, we really need to understand that now is not normal, and what we're experiencing now is not normal. And that if you're doing anything to help your child think about the screen time that they are using daily, that's amazing. That just showing up, I love that parenting quote that 90% of parenting is showing up, is being there. And we can get really worked up about what it is that we're doing, but I think if you are making time to connect with your children, and this leads to one of the big takeaways that I've learned about in the last week. I was reviewing some of the UNICEF and WHO's recommendations on parenting in this time. And one of the opening statements that they had was spend time with your child. And I know it can be cliched to say these kind of things, but really, the time that we spend with our children is really where we'll start to pick up on what it is they're going through. So this recommendation was that you spend 20 minutes per child per day with one-on-one interaction. Obviously, in your home environment, depending on where you're at with your kids, that may or may not be possible. But I think the emphasis that it's about our relationships that will get us through this time of challenge, and not the gizmos that we have, or the remote solutions that we plugged into, but it's really that one-to-one parent to child quality time. And in that time, it's really great to maybe spend it, depending on the age of your child. You can spend it with a book where you're discussing the pictures that you're seeing, asking them about how this relates to what they're going through in their day to day, asking them how they feel, what is going on for them. And this really reminds me of a conversation I had with a parent recently where their child was really grieving the reality of, this reality that we're in, where she couldn't spend time with her friends, and she was really worried about what was going to happen to those relationships. When would she see them again? And it can be very easy for us as adults to forget how important those relationships are for our children, and to give them opportunities to continue to be in connection. So I'm going to go and have a look at some of the questions that we had. And the first one, I think, is just such an indication of the broad spectrum where parents are at in terms of relating to their children and how their children use devices. So the first question was, I have a 10-year-old son who is permanently attached to a cell phone. Stop it or leave it? And I think the fact that this question was brought up reveals to me how important it is that even the most simple message out there, that if parents are doing anything, that's great. And maybe all that doing is reflecting on your own relationship to your device and how you use it around your children. So from my point of view, of course, as I said, full disclaimers, I'm not managing children in my own home. So we're just making recommendations, and not, any form of judgment. You really, as a parent, will be best positioned to understand what is best for your child. However, I would definitely say that if your child is permanently attached to a cell phone at age 10, that's definitely an opportunity for a conversation to happen. And I don't think that um, leaving your child with access to a cell phone at age 10 is a great idea for a number of reasons. So the first one will be the amount of screen time that child is consuming. And we've got a great recommendation called the 20-20-20 rule, so that for every, and you can use this yourself as well, for every 20 minutes that you're on your phone, stop looking at the screen for 20 seconds and focus on something 20 feet away. That's about 6 meters. And basically that's just to help your eyes adjust to the kind of the deeper focal depth, or the far distant focal depth, to keep your eye muscles in good health. And with children, that's even more important. So if you have a child who's using their devices, and of course they all are using remote learning, you're wanting to make sure that at least for 20 seconds, every 20 minutes, they're looking outside, checking something out, or looking to the back of the room and blinking a bit, giving their eyes some time to rest. So on the physical level, that's why I think that's important. On the kind of mental health component, I was reading an article recently that referred to screens as toxic mirrors. And I think this is a very important one to keep in mind as parents. So, when our children are learning about the world, and I'll put that in inverted commas because the world we learn about on our screens is not necessarily the truth. When they are learning about the world and themselves through what this world is telling them about themselves, we need to understand that for the most part, that screen is a toxic mirror. It's not going to be reflecting back to your child truths about themselves that are edifying, that build them up, that help them to make good decisions, because obviously there's so many different ways in which screens are used for commercial value, to get your child to buy into brands, to get them to spend more time, to use more data, which at the end of the day is behind a lot of our of how our screens are set up. They're set up so that we will stay on them. So, in terms of mental health, we have to understand that leaving your child with that toxic mirror, and that's a way of understanding it, is going to have a negative mental health effect on them, especially if if the child is using it late at night or taking the screen into their own bedroom, where you can't control how long they're spending on the device. Now, the other component to this is, of course, access to adults and adult content. And this is really an important one because as a 10-year-old, you would never leave your 10-year-old out in a public park where any adult could interact with them unsupervised. And if your child is 10 and is on their phone, chances are they've figured out ways to chat with the world out there. And if you think of the slide that I showed you earlier about risk taking, risk taking and learning are kind of paired together. So, seeing as though our children don't really have that many opportunities to take safe or minimal risks in our home environments due to the lockdown, they may be looking to take those risks online. And the issue there is that you don't know where your child is spending that time if they have access to a phone that has no filtering or a phone where they can add their own apps. So, definitely, I would say if you are letting your child use a phone at age 10, I would recommend that you let them use your phone or you have a phone that you own. And this is another teaching piece in this space. You can explain to your child that you own the phone that you are letting them use and that it's not their phone, you're just loaning it to them for the time being. So, making sure that there's no unsupervised access that your child has, because even in a live stream like this one, or in a gaming environment, if they've got an open chat, your child will just might overhear 5 or 10 different words that will very quickly mean that they have something to search for as they go into the day. And if they start searching for things that they've heard, it can very quickly become, yeah, not only something that's hard um, to explain to them, but also they may be aware of things that just are not appropriate for their age group. For example, pornography or something like that. So no quick answers, but I would say in a short answer, if your child is 10, you definitely don't want to be leaving them to their own devices with that phone because, as I said, you don't know what kind of information they're going to be accessing. Um, Another one here, and just looking at the time, it'll be the last question. We have a 13-year-old boy who has, over the past few months, grown more and more defiant on every level. So, as you can see, there's that adolescent predisposition to opposing authority, trying to individuate, trying to get their own opinion. He used to be a sporty boy and now lacks interest in everything except playing his games on his PC. We have sat down and had many discussions about his bad attitude towards everything and general lack of manners. He has a problem with doing everything from taking a shower, brushing his teeth, packing away the washing, and of course, daily chores are seen as a huge punishment in his eyes. We've now banned him from playing any games as he has no self-discipline and absolutely no regard for our requests to stop and take breaks. And if we don't sit and spoon feed him and nag him to death about his schoolwork, it just doesn't get done. He's already behind by 5 or 6 months and could care less. So, obviously, a very difficult situation to be in with an adolescent child. And my big perspective here is the power of a preemptive conversation. So, we have to understand that just like that model I showed you earlier, when that feeling brain is really engaged and running the show, the thinking brain has very little ability to engage with reality because it's just so overwhelmed by feelings. And in the adolescent brain, that is even felt even more intensely than us as adults. So number one in this environment, I would say that you're not wanting to have reactive conversations. As much as possible, we're wanting preemptive conversations. So finding a time when your child is not emotionally stirred up or not lost in their game or zombied out after an hour of screen time, and then pulling them into a conversation and saying, listen, this is unacceptable and we have to change all of this, but rather finding a time when they are calm and they haven't actually done anything wrong, and you as a parent are not emotionally charged up. So picking your battles and finding when to have that conversation. So finding the time to have the conversation, sitting them down and saying, listen, we need to talk about how our home is running, and trying as much as you can to give them enough agency or to give them enough sense of input into the conversation where it doesn't become a head-to-head clash of kind of totalitarianistic or autocratic control where you're saying this is how it is and there's no choice for you. We have to explain to them using something like the hand brain model or the kind of slide that I've just showed you, where you can explain to them why it's important that they are developing their ability to to control how they feel. And I would say in this child's case, this 13-year-old's case, he's obviously seeking escape in the gaming so that he doesn't have to deal with reality. And reality includes chores and deadlines and schoolwork and all these things. And those are causing him emotional stress or anxiety. Perhaps he doesn't feel like he can do it, or he's failing at it. And so the gaming is really a way that he can just numb out and get the device to make him feel a certain way. So approaching this conversation, I would, from the get-go, like I said, preemptive, find a time when he's not emotionally charged, talk to him about how his behavior is impacting you and what the consequences of his continued behavior would be for him. So, and through that, asking him questions about why it is that he thinks that he's doing the things that he's doing, and hopefully getting him to a point where he can understand that it's a lot to do with avoiding the feelings that he has. So from there, we would then want to have a conversation about consequences and the decisions that lead to these consequences. So as a parent, you can say that given the past behavior, you don't feel that leaving a computer in his room, for example, is helping him. So you're going to be taking that away. Or having unsupervised access to his device is resulting in this ongoing negative behavior. And so you're taking that away, but always giving a reason why. And then from there, looking to give that child just a little bit of agency to negotiate what they can work with. So helping them understand that trust is something that is built over time, and that currently you having to do something in response to their behavior, but that won't be forever. If they can change how they are interacting with you, you are willing to give them more freedom as they show that they can be trusted. And I really love there's a school of thought called the smart choice parenting approach. And really what it says is that if we can set preemptive conversations where we explain the consequences to our children, then our role as adults is really just to enforce those consequences without any drama, without any disappointment and anger and blaming, but rather to enforce the consequences with a sense of confusion that the child has made the choice that they have. And I think this is important because it always puts the agency or the power to make a different choice in the hands of our children. And we're wanting them to have the learning of what is the decision and what is the consequence. You as an adult need to take the time to explain to your child and even write up what those agreements are. So this is when you're allowed to play games, this is when you're not, this is how much time, this is the results of what will happen if you break these rules. And we have a great download on that URL I said in the beginning of the episode, www.beintouch.org.za/live. And if you have a look on the left side of the screen, you'll see the Digital Family Alliance, which you can download and edit, and use that as a template to explain to your child that these are the consequences of the choices that you're making. And then as a parent, you can act into it, really acting surprised and confused, but not angry or disappointed about the choice that your child has made. And that's a really great way to understand, to approach speaking to your children. So I hope that's useful. Preempting the poor behavior and not making it responsive. So maybe first thing in the morning having that conversation, helping them understand the results of the past behavior and why you're now setting these limits, and then helping them keep to those consequences and explaining it to them in a way that isn't shaming, but rather is just simply confusing, that you're confused, that we set this limit, you overstepped it, and the result is the consequence that we agreed, and that means you don't have access to your phone for 3 days, or whatever the consequence you've wanted to put in place with your child. And you can almost act into that confusion of like, really don't understand why it is that you've decided to do this. So I hope those little speaking points help, and feel free to join in back tonight at 7 p.m. where we'll be going over some of these ideas once again for our parents that couldn't be here now. And if you'd like any of the resources I've spoken about, head over to www.beintouch.org.za/live, and we've got a list of resources there that you can make use of. So thank you very much for joining us on this morning episode of This Week in Digital Parenting with me, Josh Ramsey. I hope you guys have a great day, and remember to be gentle on yourselves, to understand that this is not going to be reality forever, and that we will come out of this stronger and with better boundaries, I'm sure. So good luck out there in your parenting, and I will see you either tonight or next week on This Week in Digital Parenting.